Hi everybody, it's a pleasure once again to welcome Jo Causon to podcast number 9 in the Unicorns and Dark Horses Diverse Leadership Legends series, which is a storytelling driven podcast revealing the secrets, successes and different perspectives from industry greats. So podcast number 8 is what separates Britain's best organisations from everybody else. And Jo, it's always such a pleasure to have you. I'm going to hand over to you for a brief intro, please.
Absolutely, Hannah. And can I say, what a great title for your podcast. That sounds really exciting. So, and it's an absolute pleasure to be with you, Hannah, as always. So, for those of you who may not know me, just a very quick kind of piece. I am very fortunate, very privileged. I run the Institute of Customer Service, and my mum frequently asks me what I do for a living. And the Institute of Customer Service is really about helping UK PLC to become even better at the customer experiences they're delivering. Because this really matters, because we can see a very clear correlation between higher levels of customer satisfaction and financial performance for organisations, but also for those that are in the not-for-profit, about actually making sure that you get higher levels of productivity. So we're a membership organisation, over 350 organisational members. We actually have a broad range of probably household brand names that are members of the Institute at various stages of their customer journeys. And that's what we're trying to help them to do, Hannah.
Wonderful. I mean, just to add to that, really, I mean, whenever I think of service and customer being represented at that UK PLC level, it usually is you, Jo, that has the responsibility of fronting that up on the news and various other big, media channels. So, thank you for everything that you do for our industry, really.
That's kind, Hannah, kind.
But let's crack on with some questions, because I can talk for England as we know. So banks have overtaken retail as the UK's highest rated sector for customer satisfaction. Fascinating. 10 years ago, very few people would have predicted that. I mean, what have banks understood that many retailers haven't?
Great question, Hannah. So just for everybody, the UK Customer Satisfaction Index, we've been doing it since 2009, and it measures overall customer satisfaction. It's like a barometer of customer satisfaction in the UK. 13 different industry sectors, 60,000 responses. So it's a pretty big survey or index that we do. And we track this, and that's really important. We do it twice a year in January and in July. And to your point, Hannah, the latest results are out now. And for years, to answer your question specifically, the number one sector overall has been retail. And it is interesting because this is the first time that actually we've now got banks and building societies as the number one sector. And to answer your question most directly, why do I think that has happened? Well, I think two things I would say is, if you think about where the banks and building societies were back in 2009, most of us certainly can remember that, not in a great place. And it's taken them quite a long time, I think, to move themselves out of that. But what we have really seen in the latest UK CSI is that actually happening. And it isn't just one or two of the banks. So, we've got right at the top, First Direct and Nationwide, organisations like Starling. But the whole banking sector actually has also increased during the state and time, as have banks and building societies too. So that's quite interesting. Probably, and are the two reasons why I think we're seeing that. Firstly, I think they have got much better at using technology and using technology really well, so very intuitively. And they've actually shaped that. And they're using AI. I mean, we never get through any conversation without talking about AI, but they're using it in a way to assist that customer experience. But they have also ensured that actually, if you wish to talk to a human being, in most cases or many cases, or when it is a complex issue, I think they've really improved that too. I mean, I can give you a couple of personal examples, actually, Hannah. In the last couple of months, unfortunately, I've had 2 credit cards with different banks scammed. how they dealt with that was really positive because they've used the technology to detect that fraud. So they were on it before it almost happened. And then they contacted me, and it was a human being that talked me through what they were going to do about it. And they handled that very, very well. So I think what they are doing is they're using technology in a much more effective way, but they're not just thinking about, they're also understanding which parts of the customer journey need to be still actually delivered through a human form. And that's the balance. We talk about AI fusion, about making sure that we've got a really good balance between really understanding our customers and understanding those pain points. And when it's something that's completely transactional, then we're quite happy to use the technology that enables that.
It's really interesting, and I won't go off piste too far because I'm very good at doing that. Financial services is arguably the most heavily regulated industry
Indeed.
in the UK. Yet it is the industry that's using technology most effectively, and I do find that really interesting. But then also, banking is a necessity. Nobody, and it's a sweeping statement, nobody has all of their cash underneath the mattress, do they? Whereas retail, certainly large parts of retail, can be a bit of a not nice to have. So has that kind of changed the dynamics,
Okay.
do you think,
Yeah.
over time?
I think you raised a really good and important point about regulation. So obviously, we've had consumer duty, and consumer duty came in 2022. And there's definitely a correlation pre and post that with higher levels of satisfaction. And that's one point I didn't raise. And I do think that I suppose there's two or three things. There are good and bad things about regulation. But some of the good things, and particularly around consumer duty, is that it has encouraged an end-to-end thought process about the customer experience, and it is outcomes based, so not process based, and also very principles based. So that means that you're thinking about the whole customer experience, not just the product, not just the end delivery, but that whole. So encouraging a much more holistic approach across the whole of the organization towards the service delivery. So they've got that really right. Secondly, too, consumer duty put a much greater onus in the boardroom and a focus of the non-exec director taking stronger response and accountability. So I think there's also another point here around who has the accountability for ensuring that the consumer or the customer experience is good. So I think that's the other side of why perhaps we've seen that rise, which is important. On the retail side, they're still doing well, Hannah. It's not like, and every sector will have its highs and lows. And if you look at high performing organisations, whether you're in the banking sector, in the top 10, there are a significant number of retailers as well. John Lewis are number 2, and they're still number 2. Marks and Spencers are in there. Specsavers are in there. So there's some interesting retailers in the UK CSI. What they have in common, and the UK CSI measures 5 dimensions. So the basics, i.e. ensuring that you deliver on the promises that you made, they're good at that. And they're consistently good at that. And consistency and resilience is really important. We know we're living in a really challenging environment at the moment. So making sure that your customer experience is resilient is a critical part. So they're really good at doing that. But also, these organizations are much more emotionally attuned towards their customers. So they really think about the customer ethos. They design their experiences around the customer. Their communications are a bit more thoughtful in terms of the customer. And also, what they stand for. They're generally their ethics or their trust levels or their promises that they're delivering on. There's also a very clear link on that side as well, Hannah. So brilliant organizations have a number of characteristics that I can see that they consistently perform well at. And that consistency is really important because when you get above average or higher levels of consistent performance over 5+ years, that's when you get that brand loyalty. That's when you get that likelihood to recommend. That's when you get the financial outcomes. So I guess what I'm seeing in the UK CSI is a number of organizations pulling away from the pack that really do understand customer experience and see it as a boardroom responsibility and accountability, and that's how they're able to differentiate themselves and ensure that they are delivering across the piece. But there are some, I guess, worrying signs in the latest UK CSI, if I may suggest that, because although it's good that the overall customer satisfaction has gone up in the last 12 months, so we're in a better position than we were last year, and that's pretty strongly across most sectors. And actually in telcos and telecommunications, that's in one of the biggest increases. However, the increase in the last 6 months has flatlined. So there was quite a big shift, I guess, from last year into January of this year. There was a definite positive movement, but I would just a note of caution to say that in the last 6 months, that has not been as strong in terms of the performance of that. So the message from me, Hannah, is that we need to keep really focused on this. There's lots of distractions for businesses at the moment. There's lots of challenges in the external environment. I mean, I don't get through any conversation in the boardroom without talking about AI or skill shortages or the external environment, productivity, the fact that we're all trying to do more for less. So I think those organizations that are winning are doing all of those things. We have to be realistic about what we're trying to deliver, but they're also really cognizant on what their purpose is, why their services are relevant, and the outcomes that they're trying to drive. And they really, really obsess about that. They really care about that.
Really interesting. And that almost leads us on to the next question, which is what's the first misconception about customers you'd challenge amongst FTSE 100 CEOs?
Okay, great question. I'm not sure it's so much of a misconception. I think it's just that life is moving at quite a pace. So customers are much better informed now. We have so much information that is available to us, and we're using technology, good and bad, to help us to inform our opinions about organizations. So I think it's about really understanding that we're not necessarily homogenous groups anymore, Hannah. So we're much more complex, or maybe we're not more complex, but there's more different types of customers and more variety in terms of us trying to serve that. And one size does not fit all. Now, we've known that for quite a long time, but really, really understanding your customer base, really ensuring that we're collecting the right type of data and using that appropriately to really design much more personalized customer experiences are going to be really, really important. But what you mustn't do is just assume. And I think sometimes as organizations, or we drown in data, or we drown in research. And I think there's a really important thing about matching the principles of your organization, what the purpose is with the customers that you're trying to serve, and vice versa. So I think the misconception is that it's a pink and fluffy subject area, that it's a department or a function that sits over here. The biggest thing that I see with well-led, well-run organizations is everybody in that boardroom takes responsibility for understanding how they're delivering day in, day out on their customer promises, whether that's the CFO, the COO, or the customer experience director. And it's not a function. It's something, the lifeblood that runs through the whole of the organization. And smart companies get that.
And I almost get from you from that we've become so obsessed about data now that we're overlooking what actually is important, and some businesses are potentially flooded with that much data, and there's no appropriate focus to get the right outputs.
I think, let's be honest with you, in our world, there's a lot of noise. Right. So trying to find the signals and trying to find the key nuggets is what we're all up against. What are the real things? So I would always say, and I love data, and we, the UK CSI is full of data, and we use data a lot. But I think, brilliant leadership is about taking data, but constantly being curious, constantly asking questions. What if? Why is that? Where could we take that? And those smart companies don't just settle, they don't just and they certainly don't just look at averages. They look at outliers. We were having a conversation yesterday about the UK CSI and how much it has moved. That's just a top level picture. What is really interesting is when you see below that how much movement there is. So I think getting underneath our data is a really important, point, and asking the right questions. Sometimes we don't ask the right questions. And the only way you're going to do that is if you come at that with the customer in mind, walking in the shoes of the customer. And then I think, when you've been around, which I have for a long time, there's a kind of a few things that your gut and your intuition is also an important part of any
Yeah.
leader's, makeup and group. So data, don't get me wrong, data is really important, but you need to make sure that you've structured your data well.
A bit of a phenomenon, really, data. I mean, I too love data. I live my whole life in numbers, but ultimately, you can make the data look however you want, and that's a fact, isn't it? So we must look at the outcome. What are the desirable outcomes, and be more
What are
kind
you
of
trying to
pragmatic and
do? Yeah.
realistic. Yeah,
What are you
absolutely.
trying to do? And I
Yeah,
think sometimes it's a bit like the whole conversation around AI. What is the intent of us trying to deploy it? And what is the
yeah,
outcome that we're trying to get to? Because it may well be a good use of AI. It may also be an old-fashioned, systems capability change. You'll have to constantly ask yourself, what is the outcome that you're trying to get to?
yeah.
And how will I then measure that? And how am I going to see that change? The other thing too is, we collect a lot of data through surveys, but there's also things like observation, just watching your customers. I think that is quite interesting. How often do we go to the store or go to the bank experience or hear really what is going on when we're in that contact center and use that information to kind of make better connections. And good organizations constantly do that. They never settle, Hannah. And I think that's they constantly would worry about something and they want to improve things at all costs.
Hmm. That's so interesting. I mean, we could make each of these questions with your responses as individual podcasts in themselves, couldn't we? But without doing that, let's move on to the next question. So you've spent years advising CEOs and boards. Looking back, what separates the leaders who genuinely transform organisations from those who simply manage them?
That's a really good question as well. And I think, wow. Um, I think just a bit of context. I think that the world that we are living in now is probably the most complex I've seen in, my working career. So we're definitely in more complex times. And I think we look at, with all the research that we've done, there are a number of things that we see consistently that good organizations do, and therefore good leaders do. So I think leadership is about setting a really clear direction, making those tough decisions quickly and holding people to account, communicating with real clarity, and consistency, uh, acting with integrity, demonstrating humility. We've touched on this one before, but it's about relentless focus on the priorities. Probably the biggest issue at the moment for most leaders or in most organizations is you've got so many different priorities. So really focusing um, on the things that will be the most important things to drive that business forward and demonstrating, I guess, courage. Because sometimes this is difficult. We are in uncharted waters. So having courage in some of our decisions, but also, which comes back to the humility and being humble, you have to continue to learn and adapt. And I see that play out when I think about high performing characteristics of high performing organizations. They absolutely have a long term strategy. They're clear on their purpose. The board does, as we've been talking about, prioritize customer service. It's not just a statement they stick on the wall. They see it as an asset of long term value of that business. And they do invest equally in people and technology to improve their capability and make themselves more agile. They focus on the culture, and we talk a lot, don't we, Hannah, about service culture, but they really, really care about that. You know, when I look at some of the other products as part of membership, we have something called a service culture index. And, you know, you can really see those organizations, they perform well across all of them, you know, whether it's in the strategy or the processes or the people there, they've got that, a really consistent view across that. But they're also proactive. They engage with customers, investors, stakeholders. They talk a lot about what they're doing, why they're doing that. And that's a dialogue, not just a monologue. So they check in with their customers. But they have financial disciplines and they are resilient and they sustain a long term, as I said right at the beginning, consistent service strategy. So when the world is mad all around you, I think being calm, being clear, and being able to articulate what you're trying to do and taking that forward, whilst also listening, constantly listening for those signals, not the noise, is what we really need any leader, any organisation to really focus on.
Interesting. Again, leadership is a podcast in its own right, isn't it? And I completely mirror, you know, everything that you've said there. But and we've almost covered this next question. However, what's one thing Britain's highest performing organisations consistently do that almost nobody notices?
Oh, that's okay. Again, what do they consistently do? They care. And everybody in that organisation cares. So, you know, it's very interesting, isn't it, Hannah? You can choose to walk past something that you think is not okay, or you can choose to stop and try to understand that. And I think in high performing organisations, it's not a calling out to make somebody feel uncomfortable. It's a genuine, that's a bit odd. How can I help? Or how can I lean into it? Or how can I understand that? So, you know, care is an often overused and misunderstood word. But I think where they care about their people, where they care about their customers, things flow from that.
I mean, that's just magic, and there is a specific reason why. So I'm reading a book at the moment by Brené Brown, and I was really blown away by one particular line that I read just a couple of days ago. And I'll take the middle bit out of it just for the purposes of this. But it says in this book, the problem is when we stop caring what people think, we lose our ability to connect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Powerful.
Totally. Yeah.
So
And I think,
powerful.
and it is, you know, I think in a world where we are under great pressure and, you know, technology aims to be able to get us to go faster through things, and it is really hard to do, Hannah, but just trying to take a moment just to reflect and trying to take a moment to understand the impact of your actions. I think if more leaders could do that, we probably would be able to demonstrate that we care a bit more. You know, it's not about being soft. It's not about being, you know, kind. It's about understanding. And if we seek to understand and we do that in a compassionate or caring way, we usually get a better outcome. Because I know what matters to you. If I understand that, then I can think about how I respond to that. It may not change the outcome, but hopefully the conversation is a lot better.
I mean, kindness is another interesting phenomenon, isn't it? Because sometimes you do have to be cruel to be kind. And an example being, I mean, you know, the redundancies, businesses are making mass redundancies and continuing to do so. But let's go kind of pre, you know, these very strange times. For instance, when businesses do make redundancies, I mean, it's not nice being on the receiving end
No.
of a redundancy. However, looking from the positive perspective, people that have been stuck in a business for so long, just doing the same old, sometimes that can actually breed an opportunity for them to do something different, which can transform their entire life. So sometimes, that kind of being cruel to be kind, it does play out.
But also, I think when you're handling a very difficult situation, whether it's a redundancy, which is a very difficult situation, or a life event, or any of those kind of things, every day we are leaning into more complex issues. Our employees are also customers, so they're experiencing, we've got a cost of living crisis at the moment. There's lots of challenges going
Yeah.
on for our employees at any one time. Demonstrating that you care through that process, and I don't mean just seeing it as a process, I mean genuinely caring, to make the outcome as best as you possibly can for that individual is absolutely a key aspect of that. It may, as I said, not change the outcome, but how you made me feel through the outcome. And that's the same in a customer situation, and it certainly isn't the same in an employee. And it may not even be a redundancy, it might be having to give feedback. Or and we should give feedback, but the ability to be able to correct something, and we have to be brave sometimes and have those conversations. Absolutely.
Yeah. Great, deep. Anyway, moving on to the next question, which is the last question, actually. I mean, which organisations genuinely surprised you in this year's results, and well, in this month's results, and what can the rest of us learn from them?
So we track the most improved actually, and we look at how we're seeing with that, and it's always great to see these organisations come up. I always hesitate a bit because it's not just about a flash in the pan. You can really significantly improve, but you can not maintain that. So I will always say this, Hannah, the important thing is getting, consistency in your performance. But I think, if I was going to shout out, I think, Specsavers has really significantly improved in the last 6 months if you looked at their performance. And, if having a conversation with them, I know that they are, if you looked at their performance over a period of time, they are really trying to ensure that they really do understand their customers. And, as a franchise business, that's not an easy model to do that well with. So I think that's an organization that I would call out. But I'm always hesitant because it's great to see it, but you've got to maintain it. And I think and maybe I shouldn't be surprised because I do know the Specsavers team and they care very deeply about stuff. We've got a new number one in the UK CSI this time round, nationwide, our number one. But as I said, the top 10 always fascinate me because we have usually, you've got UK Power Networks in there, you've got First Direct in there, you've got Nationwide, you've got Specsavers, you've got Marks and Spencers. There are some consistently high performing organisations that are always in the top 10. And they're doing well across all of those dimensions.
So does that mean that the businesses that don't perform so well, it can potentially be quite a difficult transition for them to get there?
I think what I would say is that, I mean, personally, you hear me say this, Hannah, any organisation, right, that has the will and the culture inside that organisation can transform that organisation. But it takes time and it takes energy and it takes commitment and it takes a leadership that is curious and wants to understand what we mean by customer experience. If it wishes only to do transactions, then you will not change that organisation. So this comes back to the purpose, relevance, and impact. And for me, any organisation needs to be really clear about what its purpose is, who it's trying to serve in terms of the relevance, and what legacy is it trying to create. And where organisations do that, and they really do that well, Anna, they They not only perform, but they sustain that. Yeah, and I think there are some. I was having this conversation yesterday about the longevity of chief execs, and it is interesting that there are a number of those organisations in the UK CSI more broadly that are doing well, or doing well in their sectors. They have had more stability. They have been more focused, and when they've handed the baton on from perhaps a CEO to a CEO, the culture in the organisation has remained. So it transcends beyond the leadership. It's really embedded. And I think that's the trick. If you looked at First Direct, I've had the privilege of working with three different CEOs in First Direct. They're so consistent in terms of their service culture because it transcends beyond the CEO. It's embedded in that
Yeah.
organisation. And I think that's hard to do, but it is absolutely what marks organisations out. It's not one or two heroes. It's about making sure that everybody in the organisation is crystal clear about what the service proposition is, whatever your level, whether you're the CFO, the COO, the front line, everybody feels that. So everyone kind of knows what to expect and knows how to step up. It's back to that point about not walking by and seeing something and thinking, well, it's not my job. It's everyone's job.
And I don't think it's an accident really that some of the C level have moved between those top performing organisations. So we look
Yeah.
at First Direct and Starling, for instance.
Yes.
But
Yes.
you've just mentioned something really interesting there, the whole legacy piece. So that to me is almost like a hindsight view of what sort of message would you like to leave behind, leave with the people that you're interacting with. Really
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah. And that goes back to caring. That goes
Yeah,
back to ensuring that you join an organization, you have the privilege of running or being part of that organization. And when you leave that organization, how you leave the state of that organization really matters. And we've said this many times, being a leader is both a privilege, but it's also a responsibility. And that responsibility should be beyond your time there, because that is, the legacy that you will be leading or handing over. New people come in, they do different things. Of course
yeah,
they do. And they'll have different priorities. But, if you want to drive a service culture and you want to have a good organization, that relies on you leading that. It's really interesting, Hannah. As an aside, we did a really interesting piece of work. I was looking at different business models. I was looking at franchises, FTSEs, member organizations, and I thought, well, is it the structure of them? Is it how they're financially set up? Is it the type of investor? What makes these organizations successful? And certainly the investor is important. So if you've got an investor that actually is taking a long-term view, that is really, really, really important because it allows the organization to breathe. Yeah, if you've got an investor that just wants a very quick turnaround, that drives a very different mentality. So I think this long-term response is really, really important. But what also came out of that research was there were two things that actually drive customer-led organizations: the CEO and the CEO's commitment to driving a service-led culture and the culture inside the organization. And if you look at some of those high performing, if you looked at First Direct, if you looked at Octopus, if you looked at UK Power Networks, they obsess about making sure that both their culture is a service-led culture and their people understand that and wish to be part of it.
yeah. Wonderful. I think that's probably a good place to tie up, isn't it, Jo? And I mean that's really enjoyed doing that. We covered so much
Thank
really
you.
interesting stuff.
Well, thank you
Um,
as always, Hannah. I really appreciate, and well done for all the work that you are doing too, Hannah. I mean, I know it's a difficult marketplace at the moment, and I think, and my last point really would be is, keep focused on, and just keep doing the right things, because
yeah,
that's really important. That without, if you are focused and you keep driving on the right things and the right outcomes, you transcend the challenges that we are undergoing at the moment. Definitely.
yeah. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Jo. Always a
Thank
pleasure.
you, Hannah. Thank you so much for today. It's really always good to talk. Thank you.
Take care.